This is the first in what we hope is a series of learning events on the importance of climate and weather information for sustainable development and disaster risk in Africa, reduction in Africa. We have about 400 registered participants, which speaks to the importance of this topic. This webinar was made possible through the collaborative efforts of the African Development Bank, the Climate for Development Africa Special Fund, CDSF, the European Organization for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites, EUMETSAT, and Africa's 5 regional climate centers. My name is Mamso Sesen. I'm the Monitoring and Evaluation Specialist for the CDSF, and I will be hosting this event along with Rachel Venn, my colleague from EUMETSAT. The webinar is divided into 2 sessions. The first session begins with introductory remarks from the bank and EUMETSAT. Next, the CDSF will discuss the partnership between the fund, the regional climate centers, and EUMETSAT, and they will also set the stage for the discussions. Representative of Africa's 5 regional climate centers will then spend the next 40 minutes walking us through some of the benefits that their respective centers have had with the use of satellite data for weather and climate prediction, hydrological monitoring, planning and forecasting, and other climate information services. Following the presentations from the regional climate centers, we will have half an hour for Q&A. The first sessions will end there. We will break until the afternoon. We'll pick back up at 1300 GMT, where the second session will be moderated by Rachel Venn from EUMETSAT. The second session will include specific case studies on the regional climate centers' experience with Earth observation. This will be followed by a panel discussion on the future perspectives of Earth observation for weather and climate predictability and disaster risk reduction in Africa. Let me share a few of the housekeeping rules with you. Please note, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available publicly. Interpretation is available in both English and French. Please click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of the Zoom page to participate in the language that you're most comfortable with. We want to hear from you and have made Slido available for you to provide your feedback and questions on the presentation. Please don't send your questions via Zoom's Q&A or chat function, as they have been disabled. We will read the questions out loud during the Q&A session and provide the presenters an opportunity to respond. I'm perfectly bilingual, so feel free to write your questions out in English or French. Please note that you can use the same link you used for this session for the afternoon session as well. Lastly, if you like what you hear, feel free to share on your social media channels using the hashtag EOAfrica, which appears on your screen right now. Without further ado, I am pleased to present our first speaker, Dr. Anthony Nyang, Director of the African Development Bank's Climate Change and Green Growth Department. Dr. Nyang has about 30 years of experience in environmental and natural resource management, renewable energy, and green growth. Before joining the bank, he was a senior climate change specialist at the International Development Research Center of Canada, and prior to that, a professor of climate change at the University of Jos in Nigeria. Dr. Nyang, the coordinating lead author to the IPC, for the IPCC's 4th assessment report and a member of the IPCC task group on data and scenario support for impact and climate analysis. He holds a PhD in geography from McMaster University, Canada. He is a senior executive fellow of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. In 2019, Dr. Nyang was named among the top 20 of the 100 most influential people in climate policy by Apolitical. Tony, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so very much, ma'am, and good morning, everyone. Dear colleagues from the African Union Commission, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the regional economic communities, colleagues from WMO Regional Association 1, the regional climate centers, and colleagues importantly also from the European Organization for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites, EUMETSAT. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, on behalf of the African Development Bank, particularly the president who we really thought would be here, but for other commitments, is very keen on issues of climate change, as you would have read everywhere, is very keen in this program and extremely very keen in building resilience to climate change impacts in Africa. I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar on Earth Observation in Africa, Satellite Data Support for Weather, Hydrological, and Climate Services. The frequency and magnitude of climate-related hazards in Africa has significantly increased in the last 5 years, with as many as 180 million people across the continent impacted by extreme weather events and estimated losses and damages over $22 billion US. The 2019 tropical cyclones Idai and Kenneth were the deadliest and costliest storms to ever hit Africa's southern hemisphere, causing over 1,000 deaths and more than $2.2 billion US worth of damages. The Greater Horn of Africa is facing the worst locust invasion in decades. Deadly swarms capable of traveling nearly 100 miles a day and consuming enough crops to feed 35,000 people are threatening livelihoods and food security in the region. The intensity of the outbreak can link to anthropogenic climate change and the increased frequency of extreme weather events. The recent floods in Sudan have killed more than 100 people, displaced 500,000, and threatened ancient pyramids built more than 1,000 years ago. This is a major source of tourism and foreign exchange earnings for Sudan. Climate change is also affecting Africa's ability to deal with the devastating effects of COVID-19 on its health, social, and economic systems. The spread of the novel coronavirus is threatening decades worth of economic and social gains. As a matter of fact, it has actually reset us 10 years back in terms of what we have achieved in economic growth on the African continent. The virus is adding further pressure on overburdened health systems that are grappling with disease outbreaks from climate-related flooding due to above normal rains in certain parts of the continent. In addition, a high-frequency extreme drought is limiting access to water resources that are so crucial to Africa's fight against the coronavirus pandemic. The combined effect of climate change and COVID-19 pandemic amplifies Africa's vulnerabilities and developmental challenges. This seriously threatens the attainment of the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework Agreement, and the Africa Agenda 2063. Notwithstanding these very stark statistics, the COVID-19 pandemic offers a unique opportunity to build back better. We can't go back to what was a norm previously. A more resilient post-COVID Africa means greater investment in renewable energy, expansion of climate-smart agriculture investments, and sustainable water and sanitation solutions. The African Development Bank Group has already approved and is implementing a 10 billion COVID-19 rapid response facility to help African countries effectively respond to the COVID-19 health crisis and to stimulate green and resilient recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, this is just one of the many ways in which the African Development Bank is leading the charge against climate change. In 2019, the bank dedicated $3.6 billion or 35% of its approvals to finance projects addressing climate change impacts in Africa. More than half of this investment is allocated to adaptation, and more than 80% of the total climate finance comes from the bank's own resources. This shows a strong commitment to addressing the impacts of climate change in Africa. The bank also aims to channel at least 40% of its approvals per year by the end of 2020 to climate change activities in its regional member countries, and importantly, to mobilize about $25 billion in total climate finance between 2020 and 2025. Realizing that the lack of appropriate climate information is a major obstacle to addressing the challenges of climate change in Africa, the bank responded to calls from African leaders and development partners to improve the provision and use of reliable climate information to promote sustainable development planning in Africa. Through the ClimDev Africa Special Fund, which we refer to as the CDSF, the bank, the African Union Commission, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa are securing access to high quality and reliable climate and weather information for planning and sustainable development. We know that the quantity and quality of weather observations and forecasts fall far below the minimum level required to provide early warning services in Africa. The World Meteorological Organization estimates that over half of Africa's surface weather stations and 71% of its upper air weather stations cannot capture and report accurate data. This implies that Africa largely is planning in the dark without reliable data. We are pleased that through the Severe Weather Information for Disaster Resilience in Africa program, the SAWIDRA program, the CDSF is bridging this gap by strengthening the capacities of Africa's regional climate centers together with the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services. This institutional setup offers timely and reliable weather and climate forecasts. We recognize that EUMETSAT and the bank have had a very fruitful collaboration in the implementation of the SAWIDRA program. This program has achieved some very important and remarkable results that will significantly contribute to disaster risk reduction across the African continent. The grants provided to these institutions are helping to both upgrade staff skills as well as modernize facilities, equipment, and regional networks. This includes the procurement of supercomputers that have been instrumental in monitoring Eastern Africa's locust outbreak. Under SAWIDRA, we have procured 4 regional advanced retransmission service receiving stations to enable the centers to access and collect real-time data from polar orbiting meteorological satellites. We are grateful to the donors of the CDSF, the UK, SAP EU, the Nordic Development Fund, and CEDA. The support to SAWIDRA has been instrumental in operationalizing the first ever regional climate center for the Central African region. In addition to the CDSF funding, the African Development Bank has invested over $25 million of its own resources, in modernizing and strengthening the regional climate centers. Thanks to this funding, East Africa's Regional Climate Center, ICPAC, is now a state-of-the-art powered center, a state-of-the-art solar-powered center of excellence for climate research and services in Africa. We are delighted that this webinar will showcase the benefits of Earth observation and related infrastructure and tools to deliver severe weather, water, and climate services across Africa at both the regional and national scales. We are confident that going forward, the bank will continue to harness the benefits and impacts of the satellite and weather information for disaster resilience in Africa in order to assist countries and local communities across the continent to reduce the risks from natural disasters using satellite data. I thank you for all your participation and wish you a very productive deliberation. And I look forward to being able to transmit the outcomes of this seminar to the President of the African Development Bank Group. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Our second speaker is the Director General for EUMETSAT, Alain Ratier. Monsieur Ratier has been DG of EUMETSAT since 2011. Prior to that, he was the Deputy Director General of Météo France. From 1996 to 2004, Monsieur Ratier serves as Director of Program Development for EUMETSAT. He guided the development of the METEOSAT second generation, the EUMETSAT Polar System programs, the initial deployment of the distributed network of satellite application facilities, and the EUMETSAT contribution to JSON2. Prior to joining EUMETSAT, Monsieur Ratier worked for the French Space Agency. Monsieur Ratier studied mathematics and science, graduating from École Polytechnique in 1981 and from the French National School of Meteorology in 1983. He also earned a master's degree in oceanography from Paris 6. Over to you, Alain.
Dear colleagues from the African Development Bank, from the African Union Commission and the regional economic communities, dear colleagues from the WMO Regional Association 1 and its regional climate centers, dear colleagues and friends from Africa. It's a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to address all of you with these opening remarks. As you know, EUMETSAT planned to host its 14th User Forum in Africa last week in Tanzania. Meeting with you in person every second year to discuss the current and future use of satellite data has always been mutually rewarding since 1995. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has decided otherwise, and we need to postpone this forum to 2021. The pandemic had large impacts worldwide, but it had no impact on the operations of our satellites and the services to users from Europe and Africa. We know how important this is for Africa because your continent is the most affected by weather and climate across all space and time scales, from severe convection and dust storms to tropical cyclones, seasonal droughts and interannual variations. Weather and climate are indeed terms of the same equation in Africa. We are therefore proud to continue to serve you the best we can in the difficult circumstances. Although this webinar does not replace our user forum, it is an excellent opportunity to hear and learn more about the benefits that satellite data brings to various economic sectors in Africa. The presentations from the 5 WMO African Regional Climate Centers on the products and services they deliver will be the best possible illustration, I'm sure. As you know, the cooperation between the European Union and the African Union has been instrumental for strengthening the capacities of the regional climate centers in Africa and also those of several national institutions. Indeed, this Europe-Africa cooperation has enabled 20 years of continuous access and use of satellite data. It has also supported the sustained development of services to an ever-growing user community across the continent and across various socio-economic sectors. In particular, investments in innovative infrastructure and human skills have been essential to deliver more weather, hydrological and climate services in Africa. In this regard, the cooperation we established with the African Development Bank 4 years ago through the ClimDev initiative and the 10th EDF Disaster Resilience Program has amplified this investment. Indeed, as you know, the 4 ground stations deployed in Africa under the SAWIDRA project will acquire data from polar-orbiting meteorological satellites and will thus expand the benefits of Earth observation to early warning and disaster resilience services in Africa. I would like to thank the African Development Bank for its commitment to this innovative SAWIDRA project. What I want to tell you now is that the return on investment will be substantial. And this is because EUMETSAT has already invested in the development of even more capable satellite systems, which will provide more and better data to Africa over the next 2 decades. We will launch 1 next-generation satellite every year in the period 2022-2025, including 2 METOP second-generation satellites carrying different payloads and dumping new data to the SAWIDRA ground stations. EUMETSAT and its 30 member states are committed to cooperate with the European Commission, the African Union Commission, the African Development Bank, the regional economic communities, and the WMO RCCs to support the African user community to extract the highest possible benefits of this new data, further expanding your portfolio of early warning and disaster resilience services. I'm sure that the products and services presented by the RCCs today during this webinar will further convince the donor community that investing in the access and use of Earth observation in Africa is decisive for the sustained development of this weather and climate sensitive continent. I wish you an excellent webinar and continued good health in these difficult circumstances.
Many thanks, Monsieur Rache. Our last speaker for this introductory section is Dr. James Kinyangi, coordinator of the Climate and Development Africa Special Fund. Dr. Kinyangi leads the CDSF programmatic work on climate information services and manages technical and policy input into the operations of the fund. He also leads the development and delivery of CDSF operations that enhance the capacity of regional climate centers and national meteorological and hydrological services in Africa. Prior to this new appointment, Dr. Kinyangi was the Chief Climate and Policy Officer for the CDSF. He has many years of experience in the design of climate change project, disaster risk support, agriculture, and environment. He previously served for 5 years as the program lead for the CGR program on climate change, agriculture, and food security in East Africa. Before that, he was the FAO advisor and team leader for the agricultural production technologies component of the EU-supported program on agricultural development in Swaziland. James has a strong publication record with over 70 published articles, attracting over 6,300 citations over the last 13 years. James, you have the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues from the Africa Union Commission, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the regional economic communities, colleagues from the WMO Regional Association 1, the regional climate centers, my colleagues from the European Organization for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites, EUMETSAT, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Climate and Development Special Fund of the AfDB, let me add my voice to that of the Director of Climate Change and Green Growth at the AfDB, Dr. Anthony Nyong, in saying welcome to the webinar, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in Africa and beyond. Allow me to recognize our ClimDev Africa program partners at the AUC and UNECA, and particularly our development partners from the European Union, the UK Department for International Development, the Nordic Development Fund, and the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. To thank them for committed resources that make possible the investments in climate and weather services for development in Africa. And also to thank the EUMETSAT for partnering to offer technical support to the fund and the Centers for Earth Observation in Africa. Let me also say a few words on behalf of the ClimDev Fund, also called the CDSF. The CDSF exists as a multi-donor trust fund. It delivers support to African countries, institutions, and communities to build resilience to the impacts of climate change. And the fund is administered by the African Development Bank as a pool of resources that contribute to sustainable development, and in particular, by preparing and implementing climate resilient programs that mainstream the delivery and application of climate and weather information for development in Africa. The grants strengthen data capacities, address weaknesses in the delivery of climate and weather services, and support contingency planning for disaster and risk management in Africa. Why are these investments important for the bank and for African countries, regions, and communities? We have just heard from Director Nyong that in the last 5 years alone, the UNDRR estimates that as many as 180 million people across Africa have been affected by extreme weather events, with losses and damages estimated at over $22 billion to African economies. And despite calls to support recovery efforts, little is being done to invest in the infrastructure needed to do so. We have also heard that the quantity and quality of weather observation and forecasts across Africa fall far below the minimum level required to provide early warning services. The greatest gap exists in both the coverage of the stations and in the core capacities of regional climate centers and national hydrological meteorological services of African countries. The ClimDev Fund is therefore helping to close this gap. It has made a total of $62.6 million in grant finance directly to 12 countries and 5 regional climate centers to strengthen data capacities, address weaknesses in the delivery of climate and weather services, and support contingency planning for disaster risk management in Africa. In Ethiopia, for example, grant funds have helped to increase the number of automatic weather stations from 271 to 289, and the information that's collected through this ground network of stations is expected to lower the number of people affected by droughts, floods, and land degradation from the current 6 million down to 2 million by 2025. And the CDSF is supporting the installation of more than 110 stations in 17 countries in Africa. We believe the support to the centers on satellite data is critical in ensuring that the 27 member countries access high-resolution climate and weather data in order to offer timely and reliable weather and climate focus. This is especially critical as now we see the lockdown from COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in the loss of up to 90% of surface and upper air data owing to the shutdown of the aviation and marine transport. At the IGAD Prediction and Application Center in Kenya, the fund has supported the acquisition of high-performance computers capable of running detailed models that can accurately predict severe weather events like cyclones and flooding. But these computers are doing more. These supercomputers are helping to combat the worst desert locust outbreak in 25 years. As my colleague, Abu Bakr, will later explain, the supercomputer runs high-resolution models from weather observation data that produce 10-day forecast information to predict the next movement of swarms. Why is this important? This innovation is important because it helps governments and agencies fighting the locust invasion to allocate and preposition resources much more effectively in anticipation of the track path of the swarms. The fund has contributed to the formation and has fast-tracked the operationalization of the ECAS Center with the acquisition of high-performance computing equipment for weather and climate focus. And in addition to acquiring the Puma and MESA stations for satellite data and global output models, a meteorological information system known as the Meteor Factory now serves as the central station for delivering climate information data products to 11 countries in Central Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the fund has achieved critical results that significantly contribute to ensuring the use of Earth observation and weather and climate information for sustainable development, ERR, and also adaptation, especially for the most vulnerable communities. And in this context, we believe that continuing investments will strengthen and sustain the results from the programs implemented by ClimDev Fund, while also providing more modern infrastructure and generating applications, products, and services for climate-sensitive sectors in the bank's regional member countries. I am very pleased that this webinar will showcase the benefits of Earth observation and related infrastructure and tools to deliver severe weather, water, and climate services across Africa at both regional and national scales. And I wish you all a successful deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you, in fact, to all our opening speakers for some very insightful remarks. We will now hear from our regional climate centers who will share some of the benefits that their centers have derived from Earth observation and related infrastructures and tools. Our first presenter is Dr. André Kamga, the Director General of the African Center of Meteorological Application for Development, AFMAD. Dr. Kamga has served as the of ACMAT since 2018. Prior to this role, he was Chief of Climate and Environment Department of ACMAT. Dr. Kamgat is well known in the meteorological community for his key role in the demonstration phase leading to the designation in 2015 of ACMAT as the first fully fledged multifunctional WMO Regional Climate Center. Dr. Kamgat has worked at the UK Met Office Hadley Center for Regional Climate Modeling, at the European Center for Medium Range Weather, and at the WMO. Dr. Kamgat is a member of the American Meteorological Society, as well as the WMO International Coordination Team for the Climate Service Information System of the Global Framework for Climate Services. Andre, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Andre. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I will go directly in the heart of the discussion. And this presentation is basically meant to provide some evidences on the use of satellite data for Earth observations benefits across Africa. And as you can see, one of the major use of satellite data is monitoring extreme events. And you have there the map of the cyclone over Southern Africa indicated earlier. And on one hand, it's also used to track the storms that we have, particularly in that part of Africa. So I would start by some words on the mission and vision of ACMAT. Secondly, the benefits in a set of sectors. First, the numerical weather prediction, drought monitoring, floods, locusts also, as well as monitoring the onset and cessation disruptions that we have across the continent, as well as climate change detection. Given the fact that today we have many decades of satellite data available that can be considered in climate change detection for the continent, knowing, as the previous speaker said, the lack and the limitations in the network of in-situ observations across the continent. So concerning ACMAT, the mission has two elements. First, act as a continental weather and climate watch institution and a center of excellence for the applications of meteorology for sustainable development. So the vision for the 2020-2023 period is to evolve towards a world-class continental operational center, supporting the countries to increase resilience and also the ability to adapt to climate change impacts. In this process, at the global level, we have the World Meteorological Organization, which organize weather centers and climate centers at the global, at the regional, and at the national level. So here you have a map showing you the network of global and regional centers addressing weather issues. That is weather watch, severe weather forecasting, marine, and so on. And you can see in terms of centers, what in the WMO network of centers we have across Africa for weather purposes. Then this second one is for climate purposes. There also, WMO set up global regional centers, and you have the network of designated centers at the global and regional level. As you can see, for climate purposes in Africa, we have ACMAT in Niamey and ICPAC in Nairobi. one of the challenges that we'll be addressing in all those projects coming, GFCS and so on, is to upgrade the capacity in the other centers, including the newly established one in Central Africa, to become WMO designated centers, meaning that those centers should fulfill some mandatory functions and mandatory products. And ACMAT role—
Andre, apologies. Andre, sorry. Your presentation is not moving. It's still on the first slide.
It's not moving.
No, we're still on the introductory slide. I'm
And
not
you
sure
should
if there's
put it in
something you can
slide
do
mode.
at your level for that.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Is it moving now? Is it moving?
Yes, it is moving now. Thank you, Andre.
Okay, good. Yeah, so these are basically the elements of mission and vision I talked about. And this is the slide giving you the network of global and regional centers designated by WMO on weather and forecasting. This one is the network on climate globally and as a regional level. And now most of the use of Earth observations derived from satellite data are to be done by those centers in different aspects. So in the network of weather centers, we have regional specialized centers for nowcasting and numerical weather prediction. So they, as stated earlier, in the SAWIDRA project, we are in the process of installing 4 stations, as you can see, to improve the coverage of Africa with upper air observations. As mentioned by James, and you have heard it, more than 70% of our upper air observing stations are not reporting effectively. So these 4 RAS stations will help us collect in real time satellite-derived temperature and humidity profiles in particular, which are essential inputs to numerical weather prediction, both globally and in our regions. So it is one of the major expected outcomes from the SAWIDRA, the continental project at ACMAT, and we are in the process on finalizing this. The second element I wanted to share with you is related to nowcasting. Nowcasting is basically giving information on severe weather as soon as it is occurring or a few hours before. And this basically rely on satellite data for monitoring. And you are having here a product to detect rapid developing thunderstorms that we use recently for the flood event in Senegal and in Douala in Cameroon. And it helps to anticipate a few hours before the occurrence of those systems. I should mention that on one hand, this work is being done, but on the other hand, to have an effective early warning system, the warning message should be connected to communication, emergency communication mechanism set up, and then an existing preparation and early response plans. And we are now in the process of actually highlighting the need to establish this institutional coordination mechanism so that these warning information are effectively used in Africa. So the second use of Earth observation in Africa is basically the monitoring of rainfall. As you know, we don't have institute stations everywhere across the continent. And what we do is we combine the existing institute observations with satellite-derived information of precipitation to monitor rainfall and actually detect areas that may be favorable for outbreak of locust. and with impact that we all know. So this is just one example from 2003 over the Sahel with the rainfall above 100 millimeter in the desert area, which led in 2004 to a major locust outbreak that claimed about 20% of food production, of crop yield in the region. So this is another map that actually helped to detect the areas that need to be surveyed and controlled. And the detection of those areas also rely heavily on rainfall data that use a lot of satellite observations to generate. And this is a table which gives you for all the stages of development of locust outbreak, what variables, climate variables are used. And most of these variables are basically derived also from satellite data. Now for flood monitoring, as you see, as a regional climate center, ACMAT monitor rainfall every month, every 3 months, every season, and throughout the year across Africa. And this actually is materializing the event that we had in Eastern Africa with a lot of floods. And we use, on one hand, the rainfall derived from satellite data and in situ observations, and then water levels from Lake Victoria derived from also satellite data. As you can see here, those years down are identify years, past years, and the current year is showing water levels well above what we are used to. So this also shows that we can use available satellite data actually to monitor water levels in some large lakes and even rivers across the continent. So this is the second case of Lake Kariba in Southern Africa. And this was related to the drought that we had in 2015. And the satellite data was also able to detect lower water levels that could be used actually to monitor and detect the effects of drought on water and the operation of the dam. So this also another, the same plot that I showed earlier, but actually indicating the area where it is derived from. And the points that you have on the map over Africa are additional points where we can effectively monitor water levels using satellite data. As you can see, a set of past satellite data are also in the archive. So for climate analysis, for historical climate understanding, these data are also very much useful. As I indicated, we also use satellite data to monitor disruptions on the onset and cessation of the rainy season. So this is the case for the city of Niamey where we are. And on one hand, we have the detection of the disruptions on the onset that you can see here using station observation. And then on the other hand, using satellite data. So the same patterns of disruptions can be seen with the two data sets, making it possible in locations where there is no in situ observation to effectively capitalize on the potential that the satellite data provide. So these are second station still in Niamey, a third one. And this one is Dakar. So the situation over the Sahel this year has been characterized by disruptions on the onset over central Sahel in Niger, for example, and early onset over the westernmost part. So this is the Dakar station with actually satellite data. which shows very well that we are able to detect the early onset, which is here in black, as you can see. Having this information effectively used to generate products are very essential for the process. So the challenge that we have in doing this is actually to be able to transfer this capacity to the countries. And we really support and would be 100% involved in all the activities for capacity building to actually capitalize on all the potential we have in these satellite products. Here now, we also use satellite data to actually detect climate change. So here on this slide, we are using satellite data to detect the frequency, changes on the frequency of heavy rain. And the historical records used is generated with the series of METEOSAT data that we have had over decades. So this is the use for NWP actually to collect more upper air observations derived from satellite and use in the assimilation systems of NWP models. As we also know, the estimation of those hazard scenario, how frequent will get drought or floods over the upcoming decades, would rely on the use of the historical hazards detected based also on satellite data and the model projections that we have. So this is another example of products, projected hazard scenario for Africa that is derived from the use actually of satellite data. I would draw your attention on the coastal part of Africa, of West Africa here, where we are expecting wetter June and July, which are usually months during which we have floods in this part of Africa. So the message is that the upcoming decades are expected to have more flooding during this June-July period over that part of Africa. This is also another product for monitoring the evolution, the cycle of precipitation during the rainy season using satellite data. And with it, we can compare the average conditions with the current year, here in black, and detect those changes on the period of peak rainfall, which in the average conditions is around August, but from one year to another, those peaks appears in July and sometime before August. And those disturbances are very much important for agricultural stakeholders in particular. And satellite products are quite important for this monitoring effort. So this is the situation in Dakar. For example, in that case, on average, we have the peak of rainfall in Dakar in August, but this year, as you can see in black, we had a peak rainfall much in July, making it difficult to cope with for different sectors. And knowing this very early during the season would be useful to estimate food production and to take the measures necessary very early to address the impacts. So as I said, we have a plan, the capacity to generate and interpret those products in the countries, because that is where things happen. And this plan has 4 elements. As you can see, I would stress on number 4, which is actually capacity building for advisories, watches, and warning, as well as actually then using these warnings in contingency planning and action. So we are very much keen to work with all the partners to use existing funds in the cruise hydromet post-SAWIDRA project to actually tackle this capacity building challenge at the national level. Thank you. Hello? Hello?
Yes, thank you, Andre.
I'm here.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. I apologize. Sometimes when I switch back to video, there's a bit of a lag, so I apologize for that. Thank you again, Andre. We will move on to our next presenter, which is Dr. Abubakar Babikar from the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center. Dr. Babikar has been working as a researcher in numerical prediction expert at EPAC for the last 3 years for Sudan Meteorological Authority and as a data analyst for the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute. Dr. Babikar has experience in climate research, project management, and dissemination of early warning for early action. He published several papers in peer-reviewed journals and also served as a reviewer for many international climate science journals. Dr. Babikar holds a PhD degree in atmospheric science and oceanography from the Department of Meteorology, Stockholm University. Over to you, Abubakar. But Abubakar, please make sure that you have it on presentation settings and you have it on full screen so that we can see the presentation well and that you can slide from one. You can see when you scroll from one slide to the next.
Yes, thank you, ma'am, and thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity. I wonder if you can see that my presentation moves. Could you confirm?
Yes, I just saw it move.
All right, great. Yes, my name is Abubakar Saleh Babikar. I am a climate scientist at the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center in Nairobi. I will be talking to you on the importance or the use of Earth observations for climate services in East Africa. So I'll be reflecting from our own product at ICPAC, but for sure my presentation will very much overlap with the previous speaker, Dr. Kamga from ACMA. So good day to all of you wherever you are in the world, and I will proceed. So ICPAC is a regional climate center that was initiated in 1988 as a drought monitoring center, DMC, based in Nairobi, to provide services to East African countries. And later on, it was adopted by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, so it became a regional climate center for the IGAD. So currently, ICPAC serve the 8 IGAD countries, which is Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Djibouti, Eritrea, Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, plus other 3 countries in East Africa. Those are Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. So we provide climate services to all these 11 countries. Our services cover area of climate and weather forecasting, disaster risk management, for example, in both areas on the technical element of disaster risk management and also on the policy dimension. So we also provide services in the area of water resources management and hydrological forecasting. We provide climate information and we disseminate this information to the users, different users. We have also a unit that work on agriculture and food security analysis for the region. Another unit work on environmental and monitoring, for example, deforestation, wildlife, and changes on those different areas. And we provide capacity development for the member state on all these areas. Moreover, we also have a unit that work on climate change. Either it provide, for example, studies on climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation, and an assessment for the impact of climate change over the region. But today, my focus will be solely on like those major three areas, which are weather and climate information, hydrological forecasting and water management, and disaster risk management, and how these areas actually benefit from Earth observation, or how Earth observation are core and helpful on this area. I will show examples. So I'll start by talking about Earth observation for weather and weather forecasting. For example, all of us in the meteorological community, we rely on ground observations and satellite observations, because ground observation to a very large extent are very scarce and mostly located in around the cities, especially in Africa. We have a huge gap on ground observation. So satellite observations come to complement that gap. And these data actually goes to feed global and numerical models, mostly run by the international centers, for example, like ECMWF or NOAA in the US. And then we, from our side, take the output of the global models and downscale it. We run another small scale regional weather forecast model to produce forecasts for our own region. So the map you are seeing on your right, it is the weather forecast we produce at ICPAT, benefiting from the forecast of the Global Center, which is originally fed Earth observation. And we produce the weather forecast for our region. For example, this is the total rainfall for the week of 18 to 24 of August, the last month. And you can see that there are some areas receiving heavy rainfall over the Subian Highland, for example, rainfall range between 1 to 100 millimeter or more. Western Sudan also receives huge heavy rainfall during that week of August. We drill down into this type of product, for example, from instead of just giving the absolute amount of rainfall in terms of millimeter, we analyze compared to the long term, for example, climatology. How is the expected rainfall amount is comparable to the long term exceptional, for example, rainfall. For example, the top 1% events, or the top 5% events, or the top 10% events. And then we call them heavy rainfall, very heavy rainfall, extremely heavy rainfall. This is the product you are seeing on the left, which is with different shade of blue. And this is a very important product because it gives, for example, people who work in disaster risk management, a direct indicator for the areas that are very likely to receive exceptionally heavy rainfall or extreme heavy rainfall compared to the long-term climatology, so they can take action, whether they are just ordinary people or people who are disaster risk management officials or things like that. And as my colleague James Kinyangi mentioned that recently when the region is exposed to this disaster of desert locusts, ICPAC team started to use weather forecast and also Earth observation, for example, on vegetation cover and soil moisture and wind and rainfall and temperature that are produced from the weather forecast to generate a forecast for the desert locust movement, or the trajectory of the potential movement of desert forecast. And this is also quite benefiting from the Earth observation, whether it is from the weather forecast side or direct Earth observation to feed this product. And we are really happy and proud to point that this is probably the first product worldwide to generate an objective forecast for desert locusts using weather forecast and Earth observation. Moreover, as Dr. Kanga mentioned, that we use satellite observation and satellite imageries, for example, for short-range forecast, nowcasting, like few hours, between 1 hour to 6 hours. This is us and our national Met services. We also use Earth observation again and satellite observation to provide assessment, for example, or monitoring for the climate situation. This is, for example, for the 10 days forecast, the map you are seeing on your right. This is how the rainfall performed in the last 10 days of August, for example. Areas that are very wet are shown, areas that are drier than usual are shown, and things like that. This is also possible because of merge of Earth observation from ground and satellite observations. Also, as I said, Earth observation are very important for disaster risk reduction and disaster risk assessment. This is a satellite image, for example, for the Afar region in Ethiopia, and it shows the water spread. The region has been impacted by flood in August. So the pink color shows the water extent up during 7th of July, and the blue color shows the water extent after the flood in 11th of August. So this is kind of assessment to show the areas that are impacted, benefiting from Earth observation. This is the most recent, the Greater Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, and also satellite images from Sentinel satellite showing the change in the environment and due to the filling of the dam recently up to 2nd of August. Moreover, we use also weather forecast again, like we again add value to the weather forecast by feeding the weather forecast and Earth observation again into hydrological model to provide, for example, analysis for the water flow over the region. And this product then, with further analysis, we use it to produce, for example, a assessment for the water level at a certain river. For example, this is the water level at the river Gash. It's called the Gash River, a small river that runs from the Eritrean highland toward Sudan, toward eastern Sudan. And this is quite useful. For example, you will have certain threshold. So if the water level pass this threshold, you will be able to give alert to the users or to the user, for example. In this case, our user is the National Hydrological Services in Sudan. We share with them, and then their task is to share with the population lives in that area. On the same of climate modeling and weather forecasting using numerical models, now I will tell you about the climate services, for example, and how it's also dependent on Earth observation. In the same modality as the weather forecast, we again use the ground observation and satellite observation to feed the numerical model to run to produce a projection, for example, for the climate situation for the next month or for the next 2 or 3 months. And we usually use this is like what do you call it, a monthly forecast. We provide it in terms of probabilistic forecast. Probabilistic forecast is, if you divide, we have major 3 potential cases. Either you have the rainfall for the months to be higher than the long-term state of rainfall, or within that normal state of the rainfall, or below that state of rainfall. What you are seeing here on the right, this is a probabilistic forecast for last August 2020, this year, and it was showing that wider area of the region, especially Sudan and southern part of Ethiopia, northern part of Kenya, are likely to receive more than usual rainfall. And that was a very, to a good extent, was very accurate forecast, especially for Sudan and the Ethiopian highland, and which is the situation that caused the recent flood in Sudan. We drill more into this kind of probabilistic forecast to produce, instead of monthly forecast, to produce now a seasonal forecast. So this is the forecast, what you are seeing on the left here. This was the seasonal forecast for the season of June to September of this year. And again, it was showing that wider area of Sudan has like a probability of 50 to 60% to receive wetter than usual condition, or rainfall that is heavier than usual, also over the Ethiopian highland and the rest of the region up to Western Kenya and Uganda. And it was to a very good extent, the forecast was very accurate. We've seen the situation in Sudan, and we have seen the situation in Ethiopia and western part of Kenya on the observation. Now, after all these services, this is another example, for example, for our seasonal forecast. This is for the next season, which is OND. And the forecast, this season is actually a major season for the countries that are on the tropical part of East Africa, including Somalia, some part of Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and of course, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. And the season is indicated this to be drier than usual. So the upcoming season are very likely to be drier than usual due to the El Niño situation. La Niña situation is developing over the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean. And now for us, after we develop this kind of forecast, we bring the users, the users on different sectors, for example, to discuss this forecast and produce advisories for the end users on different sectors. For example, for disaster risk management, this is the kind of advisory we produce, the one you are seeing on your right. For the disaster risk management sectors, for agriculture and food security sector, water and energy, livestock and health. All those sectors, experts from the region, they come and look at this forecast and produce advisories for each country. This is advisory for Kenya, and we produce for the, as example, but we produce for the all 11 countries are in the region. And from here, I think now you can see the value chain from Earth observation fed into a numerical model, a global one, and then downscaled further to a regional forecast. And that regional forecast is discussed with experts in different areas or on different socioeconomic sectors. And then we produce advisories for the decision makers, and we share it with decision makers. I think you see all the value up from data and observations taken by satellite or ground observation up to advisories to the end users. So I would like to conclude here by saying that the Earth observation are key to deliver quality weather and climate and hydrological services in the region, and especially for a region like East Africa, which is quite sensitive to climate and weather variability. So, and of course, the future challenges from climate change. Climate information and early warning system are also very much needed for the future, especially with the challenge of climate change. I would like to close by acknowledging some of my colleagues who are very much involved in producing these services. I would like to pay them tribute and for their contribution and hard work. And I thank you for your time and attention.
Excellent, Abubakar. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the question and answer portion of the first session of this webinar. We encourage anybody with a question to, as a reminder, please post your questions on Slido. We are only fielding Slido questions. If you are posting questions on chat or on the Q&A, it has been disabled. So we don't even have access to them. So please do post your questions on Slido. So I'm going to start reading the questions out loud to the panelists. And I ask the panelists, in the interest of time, we have about a half an hour for the Q&A, to keep your responses as concise as possible. This first question, I think I'm going to ask Andre to answer, and it comes from Dorsuma. The main providers of weather and climate services, the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services and MHSs in Africa, have very limited capacity. How much will it cost, and what does it take to support African NMHSs, and who should pay for this cost? Andre?
Can you hear me? Is it good?
Yes, Andre, I can hear you. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, actually, a good question. So, from our experience, in fact, we have a situation in Africa where there is a real need for capacity building, and that's why you saw in my the elements of the plan, capacity building sitting there effectively. So we should recognize two things. On one hand, given the human resource and the infrastructure in the countries today, there are some level of capacity that we can develop, but it will need to be much more effective. Ultimately, the involvement of the regional centers in, on one hand, building capacity, on the other hand, supporting the operations. And to illustrate this, I will just use a case recently with the floods in Senegal. The products that we provided on Friday, that's before the weekend, was something relatively new. And it was not always very easy to build capacity on the spot, to interpret it effectively and give the information necessary. So this shows that we see capacity building on two aspects. On one hand, at the national level, and also at the regional level. And you saw the map of WMO regional centers. Only 3 are actually designated by WMO. That is, they have passed the mandatory functions. Only 3. So we still have at the regional level to support capacity building of the others to effectively function. And the cost of it, in our estimates, if we invest for about 5 years on human resource specifically, about 5 million euros over a period of 5 years, we can leverage on the human capacity that is needed. And we are not talking of organizing only workshop. We are talking of funding the building of the training material. There is no, the history have shown that it doesn't have an impact if we train a forecaster for West Africa with cases that occurred in the tropical regions of Asia or in Europe. So we have a real need in the capacity building plan to put resources on building the training material based on events that occur here in Africa. That's why the cost can be considered high, about 5 million euros in 5 years' time. Thank you. Okay, I've finished. You have the floor, madam.
Yes,
are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you perfectly. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Albert Niaga. He asks, pourquoi ACMAD ne ressent-il pas son intervention aux centres régionaux qui, eux, apportent l'appui aux pays de leur région? That one is for you as well, Andre.
Allô, vous pouvez reprendre la question?
Oui, je reprends la question. OK. Pourquoi ACMAD ne recentre-t-il pas son intervention aux centres régionaux qui, eux, apportent l'appui aux pays de leur région?
OK, oui, c'est aussi une très bonne question. Bon, en fait, la situation est que le besoin en termes de renforcement des capacités au niveau des pays est énorme. Et dans pas mal de situations, comme je vous l'ai montré, par exemple, avec la carte des centres climatiques régionaux, pour parler de ce cas-là, l'une des fonctions obligatoires d'un centre régional, c'est de faire la formation. Et vous avez vu que nous disposons actuellement de 3 centres, donc ACMAD, ICPAP et puis un réseau en Afrique du Nord. Il y a d'autres centres qui sont dans le pipeline et qui ont besoin de renforcement de capacité et d'appui pour pouvoir être capables de faire de la formation au niveau pays. Et ça fait donc qu'il faut voir le renforcement de capacité en Afrique sous ces 2 angles, au niveau régional et au niveau national. C'est souvent une erreur de notre part de considérer que les centres régionaux automatiquement ont les capacités pour la formation. Et l'OMM a mis en place des centres globaux qui ont pour rôle, en fait, de former les centres régionaux qui vont par la suite former au niveau national. Donc, la stratégie de formation à ACMAD a ces 2 aspects. D'une part, former les centres régionaux et éventuellement certains pays pilotes, et puis à ces centres régionaux de dispatcher la formation au niveau de tous les pays de leur centre de responsabilité. Donc, j'insiste là-dessus, il faut voir la formation sous ces 2 aspects, parce que nous avons 54 pays et tous les pays ne sont pas au même niveau et il est nécessaire d'utiliser et le centre continental et puis les centres régionaux pour pouvoir accélérer la formation et avoir des effets dans un court moyen terme. Merci.
Sorry, I was muted. Excellent. Merci, André. Merci beaucoup. The next question is again for you, André. It's from Innocent Ona. Very good presentation by ACMAD. The integration of satellite data, projected hazard scenarios to predict future climate change risks to safeguard the exposure of AfDB's Category 1 projects will be very useful. Is the MyDeWitTerra tool an open source and user-friendly? I hope I read that correctly. He wants to know, is the MyDeWitTerra tool an open source and user-friendly?
Okay, yeah. MyDeWitTerra is a tool that we are working on with the Italian corporation. Actually, it's a very interesting tool in the sense that it can be used by forecasters, it can be used by civil protection agencies, it can be used by humanitarians. So in the system, you have the opportunity to have an interface that satisfies all the stakeholders involved in disaster risk management. And it is something specific for that system. So we are in the process of working with the Italians to have this tool usable in Africa because it will make it possible in the meteorological services to have the same tool as you have in an emergency room or emergency situation room run by the civil protection agencies, and then have the communication that we are trying to work on become fluid and simple for all the stakeholders. Because we have a challenge now, which is the emergency communication strategy we need to implement with the civil protection in the country. Trees are not yet really there and effective, and that's why we are struggling with post-disaster response after disasters. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andre. The next question, I'm going to let Abubakar respond, is from Oluwadere Teshun. How can I use this satellite data for monitoring of daily convection activities over desired sectors in Africa? Before you respond, Abubakar, I see some people are raising your hands. Again, for any comments, please put them on Slido. We are fielding comments through Slido. Please don't raise your hand or use the chat function. Just post your comment or your question on Slido. Thank you. Abubakar, go ahead.
Yes, about the use for example, convention activities. I think one of the tools is to use EUMETSAT imageries, which are available at EUMETSAT, and because convection is like a short development process in the atmosphere, you would need to use like satellite imageries for like short term, because those are almost hourly images, and they are posted at EUMETSAT website. They can give you an idea about the development of the cloud over a certain region, and they can be very useful to provide, for example, nowcast at the airport or for a heavy rainfall potential over a certain area in the region or in a region of your interest. Of course, beside this, you have your own ground observation, and if you also have if you have your own ground observation and you have radisson data, for example, you could also analyze your atmospheric profile to be able to see where you have a risk of convection and heavy rainfall over that particular region or not.
Well done, Abubakar. The next question is for you as well. It's from Haitham Belrisi. Do you use ground and satellite data only to initialize your model, or do you use as well some data assimilation algorithms? If so, what kind of algorithms do you use? 3D VAR, KF? I hope I said those correct.
Yes, yeah. I see these are a bit technical questions. For now, at the moment, most of us, as I said, we collaborate with the international centers because even those RARS stations that have been mentioned by the presenters are in the process of the installment, and unfortunately, COVID-19 has delayed that effort, but they are in the process to be installed in the regional climate centers. One of them, of course, ICPAC, and that will give us access for the data that in a more timely manner. But for now, we collaborate with the international centers, for example, like ECMWF and NOAA. Those are the global centers who, at the moment, they receive ground observation, satellite observations, and assimilate them into their global models. Now, and for us, we get this data to feed our regional model, or we run another numerical model, but on a more regional scale to produce a forecast for our region. So it's like a cascaded state of that the Earth observation are passed to global model and then implicitly passed to us in the regional center to produce our weather forecast. For the future, we will implement our own data assimilation, hopefully, and run our own data assimilation cycle and forecast.
Thank you, Abubakar. Help us out with the next question as well. Do you assess the impact of the HPC for the production of NWP products?
Could you say it again?
Sure.
Do we assess?
Do you assess the impact of the HPC for the production of NWP products?
I'll assume that by the question is, do you assess the impact, or like how useful, for example, maybe the HPCs are in the numerical weather prediction process? If so, they are key, because it is like almost impossible to run a timely weather forecast for a region on an ordinary computer. Like those small computers, they are not helpful. The HPCs are just, it's like it's a computer, but with a huge capacity. For example, the computer at home you have, probably it has 2 processors and maybe 8 gigabyte of RAM and maybe 256 hard disk or something like that. The HPCs has probably like thousands of processors. It has RAMs and terabytes, and it has a storage capacity of hundreds of terabytes, because those numerical model simulations generate huge data and they require huge amount of computation power. You cannot run it on for a regional scale, you cannot run it on just an ordinary computer. So that is the useful or the need for HPCs as a key infrastructure to run a numerical weather prediction on a regional scale, and then pass it maybe to the member countries. So in that sense, HPCs are key.
Thank you, Abubakar. Andre, Emilio Barizano wants to know how we can optimize the exploitation of technical and scientific results using Earth observation data. Results fully recognized by scientific and thematic area communities, by the African decision makers in their daily mandate in order to strengthen and to optimize their decision.
Okay, yeah,
can you hear it? You heard it? Yeah.
Yeah, I heard it quite well.
Okay,
yeah, and usually to respond effectively, let's use the case. So for monitoring, for nowcasting, or let's say monitoring severe weather, we have a product which has to be generated by processing information that comes from EUMETSAT. That is, if you have the reception system of EUMETSAT, you need to develop additional products from that set of products. It is called Rapid Developing Thunderstorm Product. It is one of the satellite applications facilities for nowcasting, that is monitoring in tens of minutes and so on. This, in the science community in Europe, was developed decades ago. In the operational community in Europe, has been used also for many years. We in Africa, an assessment made a few years ago showed that only Morocco and South Africa has been effectively using the Rapid Developing Thunderstorm product, which is essential when you want to monitor severe weather. So there you have a clear case where the science has generated something new and useful, but we have not been able to transfer it effectively in the operations, in the nowcasting operations of the countries. And one of the reasons for this is that most of our capacity building projects that we have implemented have put a lot of money on workshops, and sometimes with little resources on actually identifying what is available in terms of advances in science and developing tailored training material for Africa. So this question is very relevant in the sense that we will need to revise the training strategy in our project, and then make sure that we build these policy science and also science operations interfaces that are needed to effectively act. And this came out even here recently with the flood in Niger. So in the science community, there were simulations of the conditions under which the dike can break. But that information, which was at the simulation level in the science community did not go at the interface with the operations and also at the interface with the policymakers. So we have very quite critical issues that we are to put in our strategies, in our capacity building strategies to become more relevant in the future.
Thank you. After some very technical questions, let me go to a more straightforward one. Abubakar, my fellow countryman, Ange Buhamending Jeju, wants to know how he can become a forecaster.
All right. How you? Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I would like also to bring it in a point with Dr. Kamga. He has mentioned, which is on the need for capacity development in Africa generally. There is really the issue of climate services and weather services became growing, and there is really much need for human capacity to be able to provide these services at the regional level and at the national level. So we need more people to become weather forecasters and to know more about weather and atmospheric science so they can be engaged in this. So one of the gaps that I see myself is that the teaching or the learning and the education on climate and weather science is really limited. For example, for drawing from my experience in Sudan, my home country, people actually, there are many faculties and colleges that teach, for example, science. They teach mathematics and physics generally, but they are not directly linked, for example, to this applied area of climate or weather forecasting and climate science. So you find the student reach 4 or 5 years, but not much direct training in applied area, so they can have it as a profession. So for my friend who is asking about how to become a weather forecaster, I think you need a bit of background in science, especially in mathematics and physics. This is, you can obtain it through your bachelor study, for example, at one of the universities. And then you can start engage yourself with the national meteorological services, because in many of our countries, that is the main gate for you to learn about weather and atmospheric science. And usually they have a partnership with the local universities that they can help you to become a weather forecaster as a profession. I hope that helps. And maybe I can add later if you reach me personally, I can advise more. Thank
you, Abubakar. A question keeps popping up about the presentations. Yes, we will be sharing the presentation with the participants. We were supposed to end at 10:30. I am going to maybe allow another 10 minutes of questions. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to go through as fast as I can. And let's just ask the presenters to keep it short. The next question is from Dr. Anthony Nyang, our director, to ITPAC, so to Abubakar. The generation of climate data with Earth satellites is important. Also important is the utilization of such data. How are you incorporating local and indigenous knowledge to design projects that will be more readily adopted by local farmers?
Well, okay. Thank you for the question first, and I would say that for now we let me come back. For now, we collaborate with the sectors. For example, with the Ministry of Agriculture, with the Ministry of Water and Hydrology, with disaster risk management authorities and all those partners. So they bring their own experience, and we share with them the forecast, and they develop advisories, for example, for farmers or for water managers, energy planners, and different sectors. Indigenous knowledge, ITPAC actually has done some project like a couple of years ago, in which there was one tribe from Western Kenya though they call them the rainmakers. Unfortunately, I forgot the original name of the tribe, but they try to engage them into understanding the way they used to do their traditional forecast. But unfortunately, also for traditional knowledge, now with climate change, even for the scientific method, it became a bit challenging to produce accurate forecasts. So the traditional knowledge, I think, had been messed up because they depend on some ecological science, and those ecological science are now due to climate change and a slightly shift in the weathers and climate pattern, in the seasonality also of the rainfall. It has seemed like it has messed up the traditional knowledge. It's become a bit challenging for them to produce the way in the accurate way they used to do. But we rely more on the science, on the computer and analysis from the experts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Abubakar. What is the possibility of using satellite data to complement the deficit in our regional and national forecasts, looking at the data gaps we have in the continent? Andre.
Yeah, good question. I would say it will depend on the application. For example, if we are looking at the disruptions on the onset of the rainy season, depending on the area where you are, it is possible to complement gaps in situ observations with satellite data. And it works better, for example, in the Sahel than over the Gulf of Guinea. There are some technical reasons for that, which may not be useful to discuss in this venue. So yes, it is possible, and it's a clear area where we need to undertake activities. That is taking what is available, derived from satellite, validating them, demonstrating in which conditions it works, and write up some operating procedures that our countries can use when they access to this data, which actually are readily available.
Thank you, Andre. Please stay on, because I want you to answer the next question, which is in French. Bonjour. Comment vous intervenez aux pays d'Afrique du Nord, par exemple l'Algérie? Est-ce que vous avez déjà monté des projets dans ce sens en Algérie? Et la question vient de Khafir Halim.
Ok, donc avec l'Afrique du Nord, l'une des activités majeures que nous avons, c'est la prévision climatique saisonnière pour l'hiver en général. Et dans le cadre de cette activité, donc nous avons la formation d'une part et la production de la prévision sur comment pourrait être l'hiver. Maintenant, au cours de l'année, nous faisons également des prévisions pour les autres saisons, mais sans organiser sous forme de rencontres physiques. Et donc voilà un peu ce que nous faisons avec l'Afrique du Nord. Et depuis un certain nombre d'années, donc nous avons un réseau de centres pour le Centre climatique régional pour l'Afrique du Nord. Et nous contribuons à renforcer les capacités, notamment pour la prévision, la veille climatique, et puis les questions de données. Bon, je dois dire que dans la sous-région, il y a un certain nombre de services météorologiques véritablement avancés, ce qui rend les activités beaucoup plus faciles. OK.
OK. Merci, André. Une autre question. Comment vous pouvez utiliser les données des satellites polaires comme des conditions initiales au modèle numérique du temps, alors que ces données ne sont pas régulières dans le temps et dans l'espace? Et comment ces données peuvent corriger les prévisions du temps à courte échéance?
OK, donc...
Non, c'est bon.
Oui. Oui, donc,
OK. Non, c'est bon?
Oui, ça va.
Okay.
Il y a donc deux utilisations, comme la question le mentionne. D'une part, l'utilisation des données satellitaires pour combler certains gaps dans les conditions initiales, les observations qui doivent être utilisées pour tourner les modèles, et puis l'utilisation des observations satellitaires pour valider les prévisions qu'on obtient en sortie des modèles. Donc, pour le premier cas, comme a indiqué James tout à l'heure, on a plus de 70% des observations en altitude. Donc, ce sont des capteurs qui sont sur des ballons et qui mesurent les températures au fur et à mesure qu'on remonte en altitude, température, humidité et d'autres paramètres. Et ces données-là sont essentielles comme condition initiale dans les modèles de prévision. En Afrique, 70% des stations qui sont censées générer ces données ne sont pas véritablement opérationnelles. Donc, les 4 stations de réception que nous avons dans le projet SAWIDRA va permettre en temps réel de pouvoir dériver des observations satellitaires, des estimations de ces profils de température et d'humidité que les modèles vont utiliser. Donc, là, en réalité, nous attendons des impacts significatifs sur la qualité de la prévision qui sort en bout de chaîne. Et de l'autre côté, nous utilisons assez régulièrement les produits dérivés des observations par satellite pour valider les produits de prévision numérique du temps. Donc, ces deux utilisations des observations de la Terre sont en fait en opérationnel considérées et même aussi dans le monde de la recherche.
Merci beaucoup, André. Yeah, it's going to, I'm going to give is this going to be our last question? We have a lot more questions. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. I'm going to give the final answer to my coordinator, James Kinyangi. James Impumi would like to know, are these funds, and I assume she means the CDSF funds. So are CDSF funds available to support the installation improvement of in situ flow monitoring stations in countries? Observation data has proven to be insufficient for validation of hydrological models in the continent, especially in supporting parametric insurance. James, please.
Can you hear me, ma'am?
I hear you perfectly, James.
Okay. Yes, that's true. Grant funds can be available for this type of approach. In fact, let me give an example. With the Niger Basin Authority, which is leading the development of disaster risk policies for its 9 member states, we have already, since 3 years ago, provided a grant to strengthen the synergy between regional and national institutions on the use of climate and weather information, but specifically with focus on accessing seasonal river flow information and making this information available for decision making for socioeconomic activities. So it's a big gap in our portfolio at the moment. In designing the next phase of ClimDev, we are giving it a lot of attention to bring on board as many of the river basin organizations as we have in Africa, perhaps beginning with 7. This is our initial thinking. We start with 7 of them to plug that gap in seasonal river flow information and infrastructure for observing seasonal river flow information and forecasting seasonal river flow information. So this is something we're thinking about, and in the second phase of the activities of the fund, we shall give that a lot of priority. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, James. And thank you to you, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation. Thank you for to all of our opening speakers, including Dr. Anthony Nyang, Monsieur Alain Rache, and Dr. James Kinyangi. Thank you to our representatives from the regional climate centers, including Andre Kamga and Abubakar Saleh. I hope that this webinar has been as informative and instructive to you as it has been for me. This is just the first part of many good things. I hope you will join us for this afternoon's sessions, which will start at 1300 GMT and will be moderated by my colleague Rachel Venn from EUMETSAT. Please keep your questions coming in on Slido, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible this afternoon. I thank you again. Thank you for allowing me to be your moderator. I ask all the panelists, including Dr. Nyang and Dr. Kinyangi, to stay on the line for a couple more minutes while the others disconnect. Thank you. I'm going to ask all the panelists if you can just turn on your cameras for 1 second. Sonia, I believe, wants to get a screenshot. So if everybody can turn on their cameras for a second, and if we can perhaps remove the, if Celia can remove the, this slide. So if everybody can just turn on their camera and,
sorry, it says I cannot turn on my camera because the host has stopped it.
Okay, Sylvia, if you can turn on, enable Anthony to turn on his camera, please.
That's my video.
Okay, there we go. Excellent, excellent, yes. So if you can just, do we have Vincent? Vincent, can you turn on your camera? Rachel, yeah? Sonia's gonna get us a nice screenshot so we can remember.
Okay.
Okay, Sonia, let me know when we're good to go and we can disconnect.
Can we have Sylvia and Joanna also?
Yes, where's Sylvia? She hasn't joined. Sylvia, I don't see her. Ah, thank you, Sylvia. Okay, so Sonia, can you hear us? Can you unmute your mic and let me know if you hear us?
Where's Sylvia?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sylvia's here. Okay, Sonia, you turn on your camera too.
Sonia. Oh my God, I'm not ready for that.
And let's have a nice screenshot for posterity.
Very nice.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Sonia, we're good?
Yeah. 1 second, please. Okay. Okay, I'm good.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I will see you this afternoon at 1300 hours.
Okay.
Well done, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Hello, everyone.